There's a saying that women in their late 30s often whisper to each other over afternoon lattes. The coldest thing in the world isn't the bitter winter frost, but lying next to the man you call your husband and feeling suffocatingly lonely. Claire used to smile when she heard that, assuming it was just the complaining of women in marriages built on weak foundations. She was confident in her 15-year marriage. She was confident in her distinguished, high-powered attorney husband. Richard had always called her his rock, but tonight, she was the one freezing to death in that bone-chilling cold. Chicago was welcoming its first major winter storm of the season, with violent lightning tearing across the gray night sky. The grandfather clock struck 3 a.m. inside their sprawling mansion, located in one of the North Shore's most exclusive neighborhoods. The bedside lamp cast a weak yellow glow. Claire sat with her knees pulled to her chest on the corner sofa, her dark-circled eyes staring blankly at the man sleeping heavily on the California king bed. Richard Harrison, the husband she had dedicated her entire youth to supporting and caring for. He had stumbled home 2 hours ago, blind drunk. His expensive tailored dress shirt reeked of premium Cabernet, woven with a strange, lingering fragrance. It wasn't the overpowering, cheap perfume of a bartender. It was the crisp, clean scent of eucalyptus and lemon. It was a scent that usually hovered in quiet, peaceful workspaces. Claire was used to her husband coming home late. As a busy creative director at a top advertising agency, she understood long hours, but she never forgot to stay up waiting for him. She would always prepare hot lemon honey tea for his hangover, carefully unbutton his shirt, and wipe his face with a warm, damp towel. For 15 years, she considered that care a privilege of being his wife. But just as she leaned down to pull the edge of the duvet carefully over her husband's chest, Richard's large hand suddenly swung up, gripping her wrist tightly. The grip was so strong it startled her. She was about to softly ask what was wrong when, from the dry lips of that man, came clear, distinct syllables that pierced straight through her heart like 1,000 sharp needles. "Chloe, stop crying. If the clients push too hard, I'll handle it. I'm right here. Shh." Claire's heart seemingly stopped beating. The air in the massive master bedroom suddenly froze solid. The roaring thunder outside couldn't drown out the sound of shattering echoing inside her chest. That single name was short and weightless, yet it carried a devastating, destructive power. Chloe. The new 26-year-old paralegal who had transferred to Richard's law firm half a year ago. A girl with a meek appearance and a soft voice who always timidly called her Mrs. Harrison whenever she visited the office. Claire stood rooted to the floor. Richard's hand was still clamped around her wrist, his thumb subconsciously stroking her skin with a tender, cherishing motion. It was an affectionate gesture that, for a very long time now, he hadn't reserved for his legally wedded wife. In the subconscious state of his drunken stupor, the person he wanted to protect, the person he wanted to comfort, wasn't the wife who had endured the hardest times with him. Not the woman who stood by him when he was just a broke law student with empty pockets, but the little paralegal hiding in his office. Claire yanked her hand away with force. The sudden movement made Richard shift slightly, turn his back, and sink deeper into a senseless sleep. She backed away step by step, her bare feet stepping on the freezing hardwood floor. Women are naturally sensitive, but they are also exceptionally good at deceiving themselves. How many times had Claire convinced herself that her husband's minor changes lately were simply due to work pressure? The gourmet homemade lunches she painstakingly prepared every morning were always brought back completely untouched, accompanied by the excuse that he was stuck in meetings and just grabbed a quick bagel. The rushed phone calls hung up mid-sentence. The weekend evenings he locked himself in his study, typing away furiously on his keyboard instead of watching a movie with her. Even the deep navy blue tie she bought him for their anniversary was tossed carelessly in the corner of his closet. In its place were sleek, neutral-colored silk ties that Richard never had the aesthetic taste to pick out himself. Now, illuminated by a name blurted out in unconsciousness, all those trivial details instantly strung together into a cruel, razor-sharp picture of betrayal. Claire couldn't even cry. When pain reaches its absolute limit, it doesn't turn into tears, but rather into a terrifying numbness. She walked slowly to her personal oak desk, turned on a small brass reading lamp, and pulled a pristine sheet of white paper from the drawer. She picked up her Mont Blanc pen. It was the gift she gave him the day he won his first $1 million case. The gift he had brought back to his home desk because he claimed he was afraid of losing it at the office. The nib touched the paper. Steady, cold letters appeared. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She didn't need to calculate asset division, nor did she need to deliberate over child custody, because they had no children. For 15 years, she had sacrificed her chance to be a mother, swallowing countless bitter fertility treatments, all because Richard once said he wanted his career to be rock solid before having kids. He didn't want his children to suffer the impoverished childhood he had endured, She believed him, waited for him, and made his career the crowning achievement of her own life. Only for him, upon reaching the peak of his glory, to want to shelter a completely different woman. The next morning, the storm passed, leaving behind a stifling, humid atmosphere. At 7 o'clock, Richard stepped out of the bedroom, looking sluggish but freshly showered. He wore a crisp white dress shirt and was tying his tie as he walked into the kitchen. "Claire, where's my lemon honey tea? I have an early court hearing today." His voice was nonchalant, carrying the familiar demands of an overly pampered man. Claire was standing by the marble kitchen island. Today she wore a sharp charcoal gray power suit. Her long hair, usually left loose, was now styled into a sleek, immaculate French twist, exuding a sharp, icy aura. On the marble table, there was no hot plate of eggs and bacon, nor was there a glass of warm lemon tea. There was only a glass of ice water and a thin manila folder resting neatly in the center. "I didn't make any," Claire replied. Her tone was completely flat, without a single ripple. Richard froze, his thick eyebrows knitting tightly together. He walked over, pulled out a stool, and sat down, his face showing obvious irritation. "What's wrong with you?" "I was out late entertaining clients, I'm exhausted, and the first thing in the morning you give me this attitude. You're too used to giving orders to your staff, and now you're bringing that habit home." It was a familiar reproach. In the past, whenever he said this, Claire would hurriedly lower her voice, apologize, and quickly rush to make his drink. Many wives would choose patience to preserve family harmony. But today, Claire simply smirked, a bitter smile that cut straight to the bone. "Were you exhausted from entertaining clients, or were you too busy comforting a crying Chloe?" Richard's motion of pouring water stopped midair. The water spilled over the rim of the glass, pooling on the marble surface. The successful lawyer's complexion instantly turned pale. His eyes flashed with an undeniable, panicked shock. However, the instincts of a seasoned attorney quickly helped him regain his composure. He slammed the water pitcher down onto the table, creating a harsh, dry sound. "What kind of nonsense are you talking about? Chloe is my paralegal. She's fresh out of college, not quite used to the job yet, so clients give her a hard time. What's wrong with me helping out my employee? Why do you have to be so insanely jealous?" A smooth, ironclad defense, dripping with the logic of a master debater. But heartbreak doesn't require logic. Claire planted both hands on the table, leaning forward, her gaze piercing right through her husband's dignified facade. "Insanely jealous? Richard, you've been my husband for 15 years. The number of times you remembered I prefer my coffee black can be counted on one hand. But last night, blind drunk and out of your mind, you gripped my wrist, called her name, and told her not to cry because you were there to fix it. Tell me, does a normal boss feel so much heartache for an employee that he brings it into his sleep?" A terrifying silence engulfed the kitchen. Richard avoided his wife's eyes. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down. A wave of guilt washed over him. He knew he wasn't entirely innocent. He had never slept with Chloe. He had never crossed the physical boundary. But the private afternoon coffee runs, listening to the young girl vent about her family drama, the times he bought her expensive matcha lattes, the text messages asking if he was tired after work, which he constantly deleted in secret before stepping into the house. How could he dare drag all that ambiguity into the light? "You're overthinking this, Claire. It was just a stupid dream. How can you use drunken babble as a metric for loyalty?" Richard tried to salvage his last shred of pride. "True, drunken words don't define everything." Claire stood up straight, picked up the thin folder on the table, and pushed it toward him. "But your blatant neglect over the past year, the appearance of those silk ties you never bought yourself, your rejection every time I tried to be intimate, those things are enough to define this marriage." Richard looked down at the folder. The bold words "petition for dissolution of marriage" smacked him right in the face. The hand resting on his thigh trembled slightly. In 15 years of living together, no matter how angry she got, Claire had never used the word divorce as a threat. He had always firmly believed that for a woman in her mid-30s, no matter how successful her career was, family remained the core. They would never dare walk away. He believed in the ingrained endurance of a devoted wife. "Are you insane?" Richard growled, tearing away his fake composure. "Just because of a dream, because of a drunken mumble, you're going to smash this family to pieces? Do you have any idea how society will look at you if you get divorced at your age? Who's going to want an aging woman who does nothing but bury her face in her work like you?" Every single word Richard spat out hit Claire's pride like a sledgehammer. So, in the eyes of the man she had spent her entire youth nurturing, she was nothing but an old, worthless item no one would bother looking at. He actually thought she wouldn't dare leave because she feared public gossip. Claire burst into laughter. Her laugh was clear but laced with ultimate contempt. She walked around the dining table, stepping right up to her husband, looking down into his eyes that were now bloodshot with anger. "Richard, you're wrong. Being a single woman in her 30s isn't terrifying. The most terrifying thing is living the rest of your life next to a man who commits emotional treason while still thinking he's God's gift to women. I can live entirely alone until I'm old, but I will absolutely never share my husband's heart with someone else. I've already signed it. The Mont Blanc pen I gifted you years ago was used to end this. Consider it coming full circle." Having said her piece, Claire turned and walked away. Her posture was straight, proud, without a single trace of hesitation. The heavy oak front door clicked shut with a dry thud, leaving Richard sitting dazed in the massive kitchen, where everything had begun to collapse, all from a name mistakenly called out in a storm. He stared at the divorce papers. A vague sense of dread began to creep into his mind, but the ego of a highly successful man quickly overpowered it all. He grabbed his leather briefcase, secretly thinking she was just throwing a tantrum. After a few miserable days living out there, she would automatically drag her suitcase back and beg for his forgiveness. He had no idea that the price he was about to pay for his arrogance and apathy would be more expensive than any multi-million-dollar lawsuit he had ever defended. Richard's polished Mercedes-Benz sped through the blinding morning sunlight of the Chicago streets. The blaring car horns and the rushing traffic couldn't soothe the irritation churning in his gut. Richard gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes showing streaks of exhaustion. Claire's razor-sharp words and her contemptuous smile before leaving the house kept looping in his mind like a broken film reel. He couldn't understand how his normally gentle, attentive, and patient wife had suddenly become so utterly ruthless. Just because of a delirious sentence in a drunken stupor, she was willing to throw away a 15-year marriage. For a highly successful man who always stood on the pinnacle of legal glory like Richard, Claire's actions were nothing short of a bucket of ice water dumped straight onto his arrogance. He told himself that a woman walking away from the protective embrace of a wealthy, prestigious husband like him had nowhere to go. He was certain this was just a moment of impulse, a psychological tactic she deliberately staged to scare him, to force him to step down and beg. And in life, whoever begs first loses their upper hand. Richard decided to maintain his silence. He would let her taste the bitter cold of loneliness out there for a few days, and then she would naturally realize the value of her home and return. Entering his law firm located on the upper floors of a downtown skyscraper, Richard regained his usual dignified, stern demeanor. The sound of his Italian leather shoes echoed evenly on the polished marble floor. The staff nodded and greeted him with absolute respect. The adulation from the people around him quickly filled the void in his ego that had just been wounded. "Mr. Harrison, you have a meeting with your major clients at 9. The files are already prepped on your desk." A soft, clear voice chimed beside his ear. Richard looked up to see Chloe standing there, hugging a stack of files, her smile bright and bashful. Today she wore a tasteful pastel blue pencil dress. Her silky dark hair fell to her shoulders, exuding a pure, delicate charm. The way she looked at him was overflowing with admiration. Looking at Chloe, Richard subconsciously let out a breath of relief. The suffocation in his chest from that morning seemed to vanish by half. This was exactly why, lately, he preferred being at the office rather than at home. Beside Chloe, he got to be the hero. He got to display the masculine prowess of a great, successful man. But when he went home and faced a Claire who was far too sharp, too independent, and too brilliant in her advertising career, he always felt seen through. There was no space left to flex his ego. "Thank you, Chloe. I drank way too much last night. Did anything happen at the office after I left?" Richard walked into his private suite, pretending to ask casually. Chloe followed behind, gently placing a cup of warm chamomile tea on his desk. She shook her head slightly, her large round eyes reflecting deep sympathy. "No, sir. Nothing happened. It's just that I noticed you've lost weight recently, and last night you had to deal with those demanding corporate guys until so late. I just feel so bad for you. Drink some warm tea to settle your stomach. You look very pale today." Those words, "I feel so bad for you," spoken by the young paralegal, made Richard's heart skip a beat. Chloe's gentle attentiveness was a sweet vibration that blurred the moral boundaries in his heart. He reached out to take the teacup, his fingers accidentally brushing against her soft hand. Chloe didn't pull her hand away immediately. She shyly looked down, her cheeks flushing pink. A sliver of guilt crept in, but Richard quickly brushed it away. He lied to himself that nothing had crossed the line between them. He was still a faithful husband in the physical sense, and this care was just professional camaraderie, a boss-employee bond. He had no idea that this workplace ambiguity was the most cruel weapon, slicing the heart of his wife sitting at home into pieces. While Richard was drowning in the fake sweetness at his office, in a high-end luxury loft on the west side of the city, Claire was standing before floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the traffic crawling like tiny ants on the streets below. This was a loft she had bought entirely with her own commission bonus from a massive ad campaign 3 years ago. It was a private asset she never thought she would have to use as a sanctuary after a broken marriage. The apartment was sparse, lacking much furniture. There was only one small suitcase of clothes she had brought with her that morning. Claire sat down on a single accent chair, holding her exhausted face in her hands. Her sharp morning makeup had been scrubbed off, revealing a pale complexion and eyes swollen from a sleepless night. In this moment, when she was completely alone within 4 cold walls, the resilient, proud facade of the creative director totally vanished. All that remained was a 35-year-old woman with a broken heart. The phone beside her buzzed relentlessly. It wasn't a call from Richard, but from Martha, her mother. Claire took a deep breath, tried to regulate her voice to sound as normal as possible, and hit the answer button. "Claire, honey, is something going on between you two?" Her mother's voice from the other end was full of frantic worry. "Richard just called me. He sounded panicked, asking if you came over here. I asked what happened, and he just stammered, saying you two had a little argument." Claire's tears suddenly spilled over, a heavy lump forming in her throat. Women are just like that. No matter how strong they are on the outside, no matter how much they command the corporate world, in front of their mothers, they are just kids wanting to fall into their arms and cry out all their grievances. She bit her lip hard to stifle a sob, trying to keep her voice completely flat. "It's nothing, Mom. We just had a disagreement about some work stuff. I moved into my downtown loft for a few days, so it's closer to the agency for a new project launch. Don't worry so much. Just take care of your health, okay? Oh, please. You two have been married for 15 years. You both have gray hairs coming in. You aren't young kids anymore to be throwing temper tantrums. Men face so much pressure out in the corporate world. Sometimes, if they get a little hot-tempered or thoughtless, we're women. We just need to swallow our pride and let it go. If the husband is angry, the wife should speak softly. You're always so sharp and stubborn. Men don't like that. Go home, cook him a nice pot roast, close the door, and talk it out. It'll blow over." Her mother's advice, heavily steeped in old-fashioned generational thinking, felt like a bucket of cold water dumped straight onto Claire's pain. She didn't blame her mother. In her mother's generation, a woman lived her whole life for her husband and kids, considering endurance the highest virtue. They viewed divorce as a disgrace. But how could her mother understand that what she was enduring wasn't a thrown plate or a heated comment when dinner wasn't cooked right, but a betrayal of the mind? It was the feeling of being pushed to the margins of her own life by the very man she had shared a bed with. "Mom," Claire interrupted softly. Her voice was trembling but contained a terrifying resolve. Sometimes, keeping the heat low doesn't stop the pot from burning. If someone has already placed their heart somewhere else, no matter how many fires I put out, the whole house is still going to burn to ash. I'm an adult. I know what I have to do. Take care of yourself, Mom. I have to go into a meeting now. Hanging up, Claire let her arms drop. She knew the path she had chosen would be full of thorns and prejudice. Outsiders would look at her and call her foolish, call her selfish for walking away from a wealthy, prestigious lawyer husband over a seemingly trivial matter. But only those sleeping in the bed truly know where the cold drafts come from. Only in the dead silence of the night can one understand the agonizing pain when the man beside you whispers another woman's name with utmost tenderness. She didn't regret her 15 years of youth. She only regretted waking up too late. That evening at 11 o'clock, Richard returned to the mansion. After a long networking dinner, he walked into the house and habitually reached out to flip the living room light switch. The space lit up, but a dead, freezing silence enveloped the house, making him subconsciously shiver. There was no faint scent of eucalyptus and spearmint that Claire usually diffused every night. There was no sound of the television playing softly in the living room. On the coffee table, the vase of fresh lilies, which used to be replaced every 2 days, was now withered, dropping dry petals onto the glass surface. Richard took off his suit jacket, tossed it carelessly onto the sofa, and walked into the kitchen. The kitchen was clean and tidy to the point of being sterile. There was no hot meal simmering on the stove. There was no glass of lemon honey tea waiting on the island. Richard opened the refrigerator. Inside were only a few bottles of spring water and neatly stacked frozen meal prep containers. This emptiness irritated him. He grabbed his phone, scrolled to Claire's number, and hit call. The ringing tone echoed endlessly in the quiet space. But the only response he got was the automated voicemail greeting. She wasn't answering. Richard angrily slammed the phone down on the kitchen counter. He never imagined that Claire's absence could turn his life upside down so fast. Up until now, he had always taken everything she did for granted. The perfectly ironed dress shirts hanging in the closet, the polished dress shoes waiting on the rack, the delicious meals tailored to his taste. He enjoyed all of it as a privilege. forgetting that behind it all was the sacrifice, time, and devotion of a wife. Richard walked up to the master bedroom, opening the closet to find some loungewear. But the moment the closet doors opened, he stood frozen. Half of Claire's wardrobe was completely empty. On a hanger in the corner, the deep navy blue tie, the anniversary gift he had once tossed aside carelessly, was now hung perfectly straight. Next to it was a small sticky note with her elegant handwriting. Things that no longer belong in their rightful place only clutter the space if kept. The divorce papers are in your study. Sign them soon and send them to my attorney. Looking at those words, the anger inside Richard suddenly morphed into a vague, creeping panic. He rushed to his home office. On the luxurious oak desk, the petition with Claire's crisp blue ink signature lay silently under the desk lamp. He stared at the paper, feeling as if something intrinsically familiar, something absolutely certain in his life, was slipping out of his control. "Claire, you're really out of your mind. Let's see how long you can stay stubborn," Richard muttered through gritted teeth, trying to wave away the growing unease in his chest. He refused to believe she dared to walk away from it all. He thought she just wanted to see his remorse, wanted him to step down and beg to satisfy her pride. But who was Richard Harrison? He was a lawyer who had never lost in court. How could he bow his head to a baseless, dramatic tantrum from his wife? He shoved the petition into a drawer, locked it tight, and decided to ignore her. His silence and indifference would be his most ironclad answer, forcing her to realize her mistake and come crawling back. He had no idea that this very arrogance, selfishness, and apathy was pushing him down a bottomless abyss, where the price for his emotional betrayal would cost him absolutely everything he owned. A silent war between two women, a resentment-filled past, and a present full of traps were secretly encircling him, waiting for the perfect moment to crush the career and prestige he took so much pride in. A week passed as quickly as floodwaters washing away the topsoil after a hurricane. Richard's mansion still stood magnificent and imposing in the affluent suburb, but the vitality inside seemed entirely drained. Richard still hadn't signed the divorce papers. He had thrown them into the deepest corner of his desk drawer, as a way of hiding from the reality staring him right in the face. Every morning when he woke up, he still subconsciously reached over to the other side of the bed, only to touch a freezing, empty space and perfectly smooth, unwrinkled bedsheets. There's an old cliché that men only appreciate their wives when the laundry stops doing itself and the dinner table goes cold. That saying had been passed down for generations, and now it was applying to Richard with laughable accuracy. The white dress shirt he wore this morning, despite being quickly ironed by a part-time housekeeper, still had tiny, annoying wrinkles at the collar. His familiar leather-band Rolex watch was nowhere to be found, lost in some previous cleaning frenzy by Claire, forcing him to tear the bedroom apart in frustration. Everything in this house used to run so flawlessly he thought it was an automated system, until the operator quietly stepped away. At the law firm, the hustle and bustle of multi-million-dollar lawsuits couldn't mask the distraction of the senior partner. Richard sat in front of a massive stack of case files, but his eyes were glued to the light silver-gray silk tie he was wearing. This was the tie Chloe herself had bought him yesterday to replace Claire's navy blue one. Chloe had handed it to him shyly with a note. "I think this color perfectly matches your aura." When he received the gift, Richard felt his chest swell with the pride of a conqueror. But today, looking at himself in the executive washroom mirror, he suddenly felt this tie looked out of place, slightly gaudy, and completely mismatched with his expensive bespoke suit. The refined, luxurious aesthetic taste that Claire had curated for him over 15 years wasn't easily replaced by the immature preferences of a girl in her 20s. "Mr. Harrison, Victoria from Vanguard Media Group is here for her appointment." Chloe's voice came through the intercom, snapping his wandering thoughts. Richard blinked, instantly regaining his professional demeanor. "Send her in." The heavy oak doors opened. Victoria walked in with the graceful stride of a powerful, successful woman. She was in her mid-30s, the same age as Claire, but beneath the face meticulously preserved with luxury cosmetics, there was an aura that was sharp, somewhat thorny, and deeply calculating. Victoria wore a form-fitting, deep red velvet dress, her stiletto heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "Hello, counselor. Long time no see. You're looking a little thin these days." Victoria took the initiative to sit on the sofa opposite him, placing her Hermes Birkin bag to the side. The smile on her lips was perfectly measured, but her eyes were as sharp as daggers. Richard smiled politely, sliding a legal portfolio toward her. "Hello, Victoria. Work has been heavy lately, so I haven't been sleeping well. Let's get straight to the point. The commercial contract dispute for Vanguard Media has been reviewed by my team. We have a 90% chance of winning if the opposing counsel can't produce any new exculpatory evidence." Victoria was in no rush to look at the portfolio. She took a glass of water from Chloe, subtly eyeing the young paralegal from head to toe with a loaded gaze before turning back to Richard. Her tone shifted into a drawn-out, mocking drawl. When it comes to business, I completely trust your reputation. But lately, the media circles and my partners have been whispering a rather fascinating rumor. They say the golden marriage of top attorney Richard and creative director Claire is on the verge of collapse. Some even say Claire has already moved out of your North Shore estate. Tell me, Richard, is this true? You know, the image of a perfect family man heavily impacts your credibility in the corporate world. Richard's hand, which was holding a pen, froze. His face darkened in a split second. For a lawyer, having someone hold leverage over his private life to use as a negotiation tactic was an absolute insult. He looked up, his icy gaze locking onto Victoria's face. Those are just baseless rumors from people with too much time on their hands. My relationship with my wife is perfectly fine. Claire is just busy running a massive ad campaign, so she's staying at her downtown loft for convenience. Since when do you care more about my private life than the progress of your lawsuit, Victoria? Victoria burst into laughter, a ringing but freezing sound. Don't get defensive, Richard. Claire and I were high school rivals. I know her personality better than anyone. She's always been arrogant, stubborn, and absolutely refuses to share what is hers. I'm just worried you might slip up and lose such a brilliant wife. That would be a tragedy. She paused for a beat, her eyes drifting toward the silver-gray tie around Richard's neck, and smiled knowingly. By the way, your taste in ties seems to have changed recently, hasn't it? Looks younger, but perhaps a bit lacking in maturity. Having said that, Victoria stood up, grabbed the legal file, and turned to walk away. She didn't forget to drop a lingering, provocative remark at the door. Hope you sort out your domestic issues soon, Richard. No matter how much money and fame a man has, if he lets his own house catch fire, he's still just a failure. The door clicked shut, leaving Richard in a tangled mess of anger and paranoia. He had no idea that Victoria was the very person behind getting Chloe hired at his law firm through an elite corporate headhunter. Ever since their youth, Victoria had harbored a bitter jealousy toward Claire's intelligence and pride. Watching her old rival's flawless marriage crack because of an ambiguous pawn she herself had planted was a psychological game Victoria thoroughly enjoyed. She wanted to prove to the world that no matter how brilliant a woman like Claire was, she ultimately couldn't hold on to her man's heart once he gained enough wealth and status. Meanwhile, at the offices of Apex Advertising, the work environment was tense. Claire stood in front of a massive storyboard, holding a dry erase marker, rapidly mapping out new strategies for the rebranding campaign of a major real estate conglomerate. Today she wore a commanding black power suit. Her elegant face was sharply contoured, completely masking any trace of exhaustion or heartbreak. The confident, decisive aura of the creative director made her subordinates both fear and admire her. Claire, here's the Phase 1 market research report. The clients are extremely happy with your creative direction. They want to officially sign the contract this weekend at the industry gala. A young junior assistant timidly handed her the file. Claire took it, skimming the numbers quickly before nodding. Excellent. Everyone stick to the timeline. Remember, in the advertising industry, if you're 1 second late, you're left in the dust. I won't accept any mistakes at the upcoming gala. When the staff left her office, Claire finally let her shoulders drop, leaning back into her executive chair. She looked down at the white gold wedding band on her left ring finger. The ring seemed to have gotten looser lately due to her rapid weight loss. When a woman steps into her mid-30s and faces the greatest crisis of her life, she doesn't choose to sit in a dark corner crying and cursing her cruel fate. She chooses to throw herself into her work, using busyness as a painkiller and career success as an impenetrable shield against the gossip of society. She suddenly remembered a familiar saying among experienced women: "Money you earn yourself brings peace of mind, but a man's heart, even if given freely, can change any day." She reached over and decisively slid the wedding band off her finger, dropping it softly into the red velvet box buried deep in her desk drawer. The soft click of the box closing sounded like a final declaration, cutting ties with the past. She was no longer the wife standing in the shadow of the great attorney Richard Harrison. From today on, she was just Claire, an independent, self-reliant woman with total control over her own destiny. Friday. The annual corporate and legal industry gala took place in the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel right in the heart of downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers cast glittering light over gorgeous evening gowns and sharp tuxedos. Classical music drifted through the air, mixing with the clinking of champagne flutes and polite laughter, creating a scene of absolute luxury. Richard appeared at the gala looking as suave as ever, but the person beside him was none other than Chloe. Tonight, the young paralegal wore a pristine white evening gown, her light makeup highlighting her youth. The appearance of the two quickly caught the attention of many guests. Whispers and gossip began to ripple across the tables. People were used to seeing Richard with his highly respected wife, Claire. The sudden appearance of a young, unfamiliar face beside the famous lawyer naturally raised eyebrows. Richard tried to act nonchalant. He guided Chloe around to greet a few major partners. For Chloe, stepping into such an opulent space for the first time, she was both intimidated and wildly proud. Her hand lightly gripped Richard's arm, subtly asserting her hidden claim. Her reliance on him stroked Richard's male ego to the absolute maximum. He told himself this was the life he deserved, a life filled with gentle adoration, not dictatorial confrontation. But Richard's triumphant high vanished into thin air when the ballroom suddenly buzzed with the arrival of a new VIP. From the main entrance, Claire walked in. She was wearing a stunning sapphire blue evening gown with a high slit, flawlessly showing off her slender yet incredibly captivating figure. Her long hair fell in voluminous waves. Her bare shoulders and the diamond pendant sparkling at her throat made her shine like absolute royalty. Walking beside her was the CEO of Sterling Ridge Estates, her client, a highly distinguished and charismatic older gentleman. Claire smiled radiantly, striding confidently. Her proud aura completely eclipsed every other woman in the room, including the naive, fragile vibe of Chloe standing in the corner. Richard stood frozen in place. The wine glass in his hand trembled slightly. He stared at his wife, the woman he had thought just days ago would be suffering out in the cold. But no, here she stood before him, more beautiful, more radiant, and seemingly entirely untouched by the sorrow of a broken marriage. A wave of jealousy, anger, and bitter emptiness surged up, choking his throat. Seeing Claire walking past, Richard couldn't control himself. He stepped forward to block her path. His voice hurried. "Claire, you're here too. Why are you walking in with the CEO of Sterling Ridge without telling me?" Claire stopped. She looked at the man in front of her with a deadpan expression, devoid of resentment or anger, looking at him exactly as one looks at a stranger bumping into them on the street. Her eyes drifted past him, landing on Chloe, who was cowering behind him, for exactly 1 second before snapping back to Richard's eyes. "Well, counselor, it seems you've forgotten your place," Claire spoke, her voice soft but carrying the weight of 1,000 pounds. "Who I attend with, who I sign contracts with, is my company's business. Why do I need to report to you? Our relationship is now strictly a legal matter waiting for a judge to finalize. You should spend your time looking after your little paralegal. That white dress she's wearing looks a bit too big for her frame." Claire's razor-sharp words felt like a slap directly to Richard's face, witnessed by numerous corporate partners standing nearby. His face went from flushed red to pale white in sheer humiliation. Behind him, Chloe turned ghost pale, her eyes welling with tears as if she were about to sob, her hands tightly clutching the fabric of her dress. Without waiting for Richard to react, Claire gave a polite, minimal nod, stepped around him, and continued her elegant stride toward the VIP tables. Her straight, proud back reflected the chandelier light, leaving the renowned senior partner standing dumbfounded in the middle of the ballroom. For the first time in his life, he tasted the bitter reality of being mercilessly tossed to the curb by the woman he had severely underestimated. The verdict of his colossal mistake was only just beginning, and the price for his emotional betrayal was increasing with every confident step his soon-to-be ex-wife took. The dark red taillights of the Mercedes-Benz reflected off the damp Chicago streets in the midnight fog. The inside of the car was suffocatingly quiet, save for Richard's frustrated sighs and Chloe's sniffling from the passenger seat. The gala had ended in absolute, profound humiliation for the famous lawyer. The bucket of ice water Claire had dumped on his ego in front of the elite crowd was still making his temples throb with a sharp pain. "Richard, I'm so sorry. It's my fault for being clumsy and wearing the wrong dress that offended Claire. I made you lose face in front of your partners," Chloe sniffled, gently dabbing her eyes with a tissue, her voice choked up, trying to look incredibly pitiful. She intentionally shifted closer to Richard, her shoulders trembling like a little bird needing shelter from a storm. If it were the past, seeing this young girl hurt, Richard would definitely soften and offer comforting words, maybe even buy her expensive gifts to make up for it. But tonight, looking at Chloe's tears, all he felt was a vague sense of annoyance and disgust. The weak, submissive act of the young girl no longer brought him the feeling of being a powerful, great man. Instead, it just made him exhausted. Contrasted against Claire's fierce elegance, independence, and sheer capability earlier that night, Chloe's meekness suddenly seemed incredibly cheap, almost painfully staged. "Drop it, Chloe. You didn't do anything wrong. Just stop crying," Richard snapped, his tone carrying a harshness and distance he had never used with her. He hit the gas pedal harder, just wanting to end this car ride as soon as possible. Men at his age, after the temporary flash of temptation and vanity, when finally facing the real storms of their careers, realized something. The shiny new distractions on the side only know how to cry and demand to be catered to. The woman who walked through the hurricane with them is the only wat your sout your semet your semtet. But tragically, he had pushed that very woman away with his own hands. After dropping Chloe off in front of her apartment building with a cold attitude, Richard returned to his mansion. The massive 3-story house now felt like a deep, dark cave swallowing his lonely silhouette. He tossed his briefcase onto the table, ripped off the silver gray tie, and threw it on the floor. A gnawing hunger hit him. After an entire evening of only drinking wine and playing politics, he walked into the kitchen, flipped on the lights, and looked around. The immaculate, freezing emptiness of the kitchen made his heart sink. Richard opened the pantry, hoping to find a quick snack. He saw the heavy cast-iron Dutch oven sitting silently in the corner. The pot Claire always used to make his favorite traditional pot roast when winter rolled in. He lifted the heavy lid. It was completely empty, carrying only the faint scent of old spices from days past. He craved a hot meal. He craved the rich, savory taste of the beef. He even craved the familiar nagging of his wife. "You're eating too much red meat so late at night. It's terrible for your cholesterol." Wives might nag, but that nagging is the very anchor holding a family's peace together. When that anchor snaps, a man instantly becomes an exile inside his own home. Exhausted, Richard boiled water for instant ramen, but the salty, artificial taste could barely make it down his bitter throat. He dropped his fork and walked into his office. As soon as he opened his laptop, an urgent email from the board of directors of Vanguard Media, Victoria's company, smacked him right in the face. The email was short but highly threatening. Vanguard Media wanted to suspend their legal retainer with his firm. The reason explicitly stated was that the damaging rumors regarding the senior partner's private life were threatening the image of their upcoming corporate campaign. Richard clenched his fists, his anger reaching a boiling point. He immediately picked up his phone and called Victoria. The other line rang to the background noise of heavy bass at a trendy nightclub. It took a long while before Victoria's sharp voice answered. Well, counselor. Calling me at this hour? Did you miss your old friend?" "Victoria, cut the crap," Richard growled, unable to hide his fury. "What's the meaning of this email pulling the retainer? Don't think I don't know. You're the one who leaked the rumors about my separation to the corporate network. What exactly is your endgame?" Victoria burst into laughter, a cold, triumphant cackle. "Oh, Richard, you've been a lawyer for so many years. How can you be so naive? Me, leaking rumors? Where there's smoke, there's fire? If you hadn't hired a fresh-faced paralegal, hadn't taken her out shopping, hadn't called out her name in your drunken sleep, forcing Claire to pack her bags, who could possibly smear your name? I'm just in PR. I saw good material and capitalized on it. You should be blaming yourself." Richard choked, his chest heaving with suffocating anger. "Oh, and by the way, let me share some good news." Victoria lowered her voice, her tone turning pure venom. "I just transferred a massive portion of the Vanguard Media creative contract over to Apex Advertising, Claire's company. Claire is truly incredible. The second she dropped you, her career took off like a rocket. Women in their 30s, when they're no longer weighed down by a thoughtless husband, finally find their own spotlight. The game has just begun, Richard. You better hold on to your senior partner chair tight." She hung up. Richard sat paralyzed. The phone nearly slipped from his shaking hand. At this moment, a smart man like him finally began to see the blurry edges of the terrifying truth. He had walked right into a psychological trap orchestrated from the past. Victoria recommending Chloe to his firm was no accident. It was a vicious strike aimed directly at the vanity and desperate need for adoration of a successful man. She knew Richard wouldn't be able to resist the delicate admiration of a young girl, when constantly shadowed by a wife as fiercely brilliant as Claire. And if he slipped up even an inch, his 15-year marriage would shatter, dragging down the reputation and prestige he had spent his life building. While Richard was spiraling in panic, back at the Apex Advertising office, Claire had just wrapped up a project handover meeting with Sterling Ridge Estates. Every clause had been successfully negotiated. A multi-million-dollar contract was officially secured. Her team cheered in celebration, but Claire just offered a tired, faint smile. She waved her hand, telling everyone to go home and get some rest. When the office was finally empty, Claire stood up, walking toward the mini-fridge to grab a bottle of water. But the moment she stood, a sudden wave of severe dizziness hit her. Her vision went black, her entire body losing its strength. She stumbled, falling to her knees, one hand desperately gripping the edge of the desk to stop from collapsing onto the floor. Cold sweat drenched the back of her neck as she gasped for air. "Claire, what's wrong?" The office door swung open. Noah, the young office intern who handled logistics, rushed in, panic-stricken. He quickly caught Claire, helping her sit on the sofa. Looking at her pale, bloodless face and dry lips, Noah's eyes filled with deep sympathy. He immediately ran to get a glass of warm water with a packet of sugar mixed in, carefully handing it to her. Drink some water. I told you, no matter how busy you are, you have to watch your health. You've been eating takeout all week and staying up until 3 a.m. editing pitches. Even Superman couldn't survive this. Noah's voice was scolding, but full of genuine, raw care. The kind of honest, simple care that Claire hadn't received from her husband in a very long time. Claire took the glass, sipping slowly. The warmth spreading from her throat to her stomach brought back a sliver of clarity. She offered a weak smile. I'm fine, Noah. Just the stress lately, plus lack of sleep. My blood sugar dropped a little. Thank you. Noah looked at the brilliant but deeply scarred woman in front of him. He let out a sigh, pulling up an ottoman to sit next to her, his voice dropping into a solemn tone. Claire, I don't have much. I just work the bottom of the ladder here, but I've lived long enough to know one thing. For a woman like you, no matter how much money or power you have out there, at the end of the day, you still need a warm home to return to, carrying it all by yourself. Outsiders look at you in awe, but people who actually care about you just feel heartbroken. Some things, no matter how hard you try to hold on or fix them, if the foundation is rotting, you just have to let it go. A woman your age shouldn't fear wrinkles. She should fear her soul decaying because she lives next to someone who doesn't care. Noah's simple but deeply profound words felt like a cool breeze blowing through Claire's scarred heart. She looked at the young intern, tears involuntarily welling in her eyes. So, even a young intern could see her exhaustion and her pain. Yet the man who had shared her bed for 15 years only thought she was insanely jealous and throwing a tantrum. That laughable contrast only solidified her decision. She quickly wiped away a tear, nodding with a smile. You're right, Noah, I know what I have to do. Tomorrow, I'm ending this pointless waiting completely. The next morning, Richard arrived at the law firm in a horrendous mental state. The moment he walked into his suite, he saw Chloe sitting at her desk, staring at her phone with a terrified expression. Seeing Richard, she shot up, stammering, Mr. Harrison. Something terrible has happened. Richard frowned. His patience had completely dried up last night. What now? Spit it out. Trembling, Chloe held her phone out to him. On the screen was an anonymous post being shared like wildfire across corporate legal forums and LinkedIn circles. The post featured stealth photos of Richard and Chloe having private lunches. A photo of him wrapping his coat around her on a rainy night. There was even an audio recording of their ambiguous, flirtatious conversations in the office. The headline was sensational. Behind the facade of the perfect lawyer, workplace affairs and the betrayal of a loyal wife. Richard felt his brain explode. His entire body shook violently with rage and humiliation. The reputation and credibility he had spent 15 years building was trampled into the dirt in a single morning by the venomous hand of public opinion. Chloe, where did these photos and recordings come from? Richard roared, his eyes bloodshot and terrifying. He grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her violently. Chloe broke down sobbing, dropping to the floor, wrapping her arms around his legs begging, I don't know, I swear I don't know. Wait, this is Victoria. Yes. Victoria told me to occasionally record your advice so I could review it at home and learn. I never thought she would use it to destroy us. Richard, please, you have to believe I actually care about you. I would never betray you. In her hysterical sobbing, Chloe accidentally revealed a world-shattering truth. Richard stumbled backward, looking at her with absolute disgust and horror. So the innocent, naive girl he always wanted to protect was, in the end, nothing but a pawn. A spy planted to monitor him. Her recent sweetness and attentiveness were all part of Victoria's revenge script. He burst into a manic laugh. A laugh dripping with bitterness and humiliation at his own arrogant stupidity. He had traded a brilliant wife for a cheap fling, only to end up with absolutely nothing. Right then, the office phone rang dryly. Richard moved like a robot to pick it up. On the other end was the cold, official voice of a clerk from the Cook County Courthouse. Hello, Mr. Harrison. We're calling to notify you that the court has formally processed the petition for dissolution of marriage and the asset division request filed by the legal counsel for Claire Harrison. You are ordered to appear at the family court chambers at 9 a.m. next Monday for a settlement hearing. Have a good day. The phone slipped from Richard's hand, crashing onto the desk. The notice from the court was the final sledgehammer smashing his arrogant facade to dust. He looked out the glass window. The Chicago sky was slate gray today, the freezing autumn rain falling endlessly. He knew he had truly lost everything. His career was collapsing, his reputation destroyed, and the only woman in the world who loved him unconditionally was now standing on the opposite side of the battlefield, coldly watching him pay the ultimate price for his betrayal. Monday morning, Terror crashed down on Richard's law firm like an unannounced earthquake. As the dawn broke over the skyscrapers, the 15-year reputation of the model's senior partner had completely evaporated on social media and corporate networks. The stealth photos and heavily edited audio recordings didn't just smear his personal morality. They dealt a fatal blow to the entire firm's credibility. From 8 a.m., the internal phones rang incessantly. Major partners, real estate tycoons, and financial firms who had trusted Richard's flawless family man image were now sending notices to unilaterally terminate their legal retainers. Their reasoning was unanimous. They couldn't entrust the legal fate of their corporations to a lawyer entangled in a massive moral scandal and a volatile private life. Richard sat paralyzed behind his luxury oak desk. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot from nights of insomnia. On his desk, the rejected case files piled high like a brick wall separating him from his past glory. A timid knock sounded. Chloe walked in with swollen eyes, her hands nervously wrung together. She was no longer wearing the glamorous dresses from the gala. She wore plain, simple office clothes, trying to shrink herself in the face of her lover's wrath. "Richard, Human Resources just handed me my termination papers. Please, you have to save me. I was set up by Victoria. I didn't mean to ruin you." Chloe sobbed, stepping forward to grab his sleeve. Richard yanked his arm away and roared, his voice hoarse with ultimate fury. He stood up, pointing straight at the door. "Get the hell out! Your fake weakness and greed turned me into a laughingstock. I was blind to think you were some pure victim needing protection. You're just a venomous snake Victoria raised to bite my career in half. Get out before I use the law to crush you." Seeing the ruthless cruelty in Richard's eyes, Chloe suddenly stopped crying. She wiped her tears, offering a bitter, contemptuous smirk. "Don't blame this all on me, Richard. If you were a loyal husband, if your ego wasn't so easily swayed by a younger woman, then even if Victoria planted 10 of me, it wouldn't have worked. You look down on me, but do you realize you're the most pathetic one here? You threw away the most precious gem in your life, your wife, and now you're left hugging a pile of ash. You're the one paying the highest price." Having said her piece, Chloe turned and walked out. The heavy door slammed shut, severing Richard's final delusion. Empty, alone, and panicked, he collapsed into his executive chair. He looked around the massive office. His eyes landed on the corner of his desk. 15 years ago, that was where Claire had placed a small congratulatory floral arrangement on the day he opened his first tiny office. Back then, he was so broke he couldn't afford the lease deposit. It was Claire who had quietly taken her grandmother's heirloom diamond pendant, her only valuable possession, and sold it to hand him the cash. That night, she had hugged his thin shoulders and whispered, "Richard, I don't need you to be rich. I just need you to be a lawyer with integrity. As long as you never give up, I'll always be your strongest rock." That promise from the past felt like warm water flowing through his memories, yet it slashed his current heart like a serrated knife. That woman had loved him with her entire life, sacrificing her most precious things to feed his dreams. Yet when he reached the peak, he treated her sacrifices as a given. He sought the thrill of adoration from another woman. A crushing, delayed wave of regret suffocated him. Richard grabbed his briefcase and sprinted out of the office. He knew what he had to do. He had to find Claire. He had to beg for her forgiveness before the court hearing started. At the lobby of the Apex Advertising Building, the evening rush hour was chaotic. Employees flooded out, but Richard stood hiding behind a concrete pillar, his eyes locked on the central elevators. He was wearing a wrinkled suit, his hair a mess. He looked nothing like the famous attorney he once was. The elevator dinged. Claire stepped out. She wore a chic cream trench coat, her hair falling in soft waves, her aura incredibly regal and unbothered. Walking beside her was Noah, the young assistant, carrying a heavy stack of portfolios for her. Seeing Claire smile gently, listening to Noah speak, the fire of jealousy and loss in Richard's chest exploded. He charged forward, blocking their path. "Claire, stop right there. I need to talk to you." Richard was out of breath, his voice trembling. Claire stopped. The smile on her face vanished in a microsecond, replaced by the cold, distant look she had mastered lately. She gestured for Noah to step back, then looked straight into the eyes of the man she used to call her husband. Her tone was completely calm. "Mr. Harrison, I believe we have nothing left to discuss outside of what will be handled at the courthouse on Monday morning." "Claire, please just let me explain just one time." Richard took a step forward, trying to grab her hand, but she swiftly stepped back, rejecting him entirely. He lowered his voice in agony, his eyes begging. "I know I was wrong. I fired Chloe. I cut all ties with her. This whole thing was Victoria setting a trap for me. She wanted to destroy our family out of spite from high school. Claire, 15 years of marriage. We survived so much poverty and hardship together. Did you forget? Please give me one chance to start over." Claire looked at the man in front of her, a bitter smile gracing her lips. A woman who has survived a bitter betrayal isn't easily moved by belated oaths or the remorseful tears of a man. She remembered a saying heartbroken women whispered to each other. A woman only needs a man when she feels cherished. Once she's had to carry herself through the storm alone, his presence becomes nothing but dead weight. Richard, do not use our 15 years together to excuse your selfishness, Claire said. Her voice was quiet, but cut like a razor straight into his ego. You say Victoria framed you? Yes, she's toxic. She set a trap. But if your heart was clean, if you knew how to keep the boundaries of a married man, how could she have gotten those photos? How could she record those flirtatious words? You fired Chloe not because you felt guilty toward me, but because she ruined the reputation and career you put above everything else. She stepped closer to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears but holding a terrifying resolve. Do you know what hurt me the most? It wasn't the physical betrayal. It was that you hid from me, pushed me out of your life, just to share your tenderness and sweetness with another woman. You left me to eat dinner alone in a freezing house, forcing me to overthink, forcing me to prove to myself that my pain was real. When I collapsed from exhaustion in the conference room, where were you? You were busy shielding your new fling from the insults of the world. Your emotional betrayal is more brutal than any physical sin. Richard choked. Every word his wife said was naked truth, stripping away his dignified mask, making him so ashamed he wanted the ground to swallow him. Go home, Richard. Don't destroy the last shred of respect I have for you as someone I shared my youth with. Claire turned her back and walked straight to her waiting car. Noah quickly opened the door for her. The car rolled away, leaving Richard standing alone in the chilling autumn wind. His shadow stretched long across the pavement, like a completely defeated general in a war he himself had started. Monday morning. The Chicago sky was draped in the heavy gray of storm clouds. The Cook County courthouse was bustling, but inside the family court chambers, the silence was so heavy you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Richard sat on the left side of the table, wearing a crisp black suit, but his spirit was utterly broken. Sitting across from him was Claire, accompanied by her attorney, a stern, older man holding a thick stack of financial documents. Claire wore an immaculate white power suit. Her makeup was minimal, but she radiated a sharp, unwavering confidence. The judge, a woman in her 50s with kind but strict eyes, flipped through the dissolution petition and looked at them. Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Harrison, you've been married for 15 years, a considerable amount of time. In the petition, the petitioner requests a dissolution of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences and a profound breakdown of the relationship. Mr. Harrison, as the respondent, what is your stance? The court always encourages reconciliation if both parties can understand and forgive. Richard instantly stood up, his voice choking, his red eyes staring intensely at Claire. Your Honor, I absolutely do not agree to this divorce. I admit that recently, due to overwhelming work pressure, I was thoughtless and neglected my wife. There were some ambiguous misunderstandings between me and my paralegal. But I swear before this court, I never crossed the physical boundary of a husband. I still love my wife. I want to make it up to her. For 15 years, we had no children. The fault was mine, not hers. I never blamed her once. Please give us time to reconcile. Hearing Richard's desperate pleas, Claire's expression didn't change. She subtly signaled her attorney. The lawyer stood up, respectfully placing a new file on the judge's desk, along with a small USB drive. Your Honor, this is the evidence proving this marriage has been clinically dead for over a year. The attorney's voice was like iron. On this USB are financial records proving that Mr. Harrison committed emotional infidelity and misappropriated marital assets to lease an apartment and buy luxury items for his paralegal, Chloe, hiding it under firm expenses. Furthermore, he repeatedly lied to his wife, using client dinners as an excuse to spend evenings out with her. The emotional trauma my client suffered was immense, leading to severe physical exhaustion and a recent hospitalization. We strictly maintain the request for divorce and the equitable division of assets. My client requests full ownership of the primary estate and 50% of the equity value in Richard's law firm, equating to the foundational support she provided to build it. Richard stared at the files in shock. He never expected Claire to have prepared everything so ruthlessly and comprehensively. The funds he secretly siphoned from the firm to help Chloe pay rent and shop Claire had tracked every single cent. The core of the brilliant defense attorney inside him shattered entirely against that ironclad evidence. The judge reviewed the evidence, her face turning stern. She looked at Richard, shaking her head with a sigh. Mr. Harrison, you are a man of the law. You should understand this better than anyone. Betrayal in a marriage isn't just calculated by whether two people got into bed together. It's calculated by whether you gave your wife's unique place in your heart to another woman, hiding it and deceiving your life partner. Once a glass is shattered, you can't put it back together without seeing the cracks. She turned to Claire, her voice softening. Mrs. Harrison, do you truly not want to give him one more chance? Claire stood up, offering a respectful nod to the judge. Her eyes were calm, but held a profound sorrow. Your Honor, for 15 years I gave him too much time and too many chances. I used to think that as long as I endured, as long as I sacrificed, the man beside me would understand and turn back. But his apathy and betrayal taught me an expensive lesson. A woman in her mid-30s doesn't fear starting over from zero. She only fears living the rest of her life next to someone who no longer values her. I signed that petition not because I hate him, but because I want to finally love myself. My decision is final. I ask the court to grant the divorce. Claire's firm, absolute declaration echoed in the chambers, severing Richard's final, fragile thread of hope. He slumped back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. Tears of humiliation and regret slipped through his fingers, hitting the cold wooden table. He had truly lost. Not in a courtroom defending a client, but in the courtroom deciding his own happiness. The price for his arrogance, selfishness, and neglect was now ultimate isolation and a permanent stain on his reputation. The strike of the judge's gavel rang dryly, officially closing the 15-year marriage of attorney Richard and creative director Claire. The divorce decree felt freezing cold in his hands. It was weightless, yet it carried a crushing gravity, entirely flattening the last spark of hope in his chest. The court awarded Claire the North Shore mansion and the equity equivalent of the sweat and tears she had poured into his firm in its early days. Richard had to pack his bags, leave the home he was once so proud of, and walk out as a total loser in both love and legacy. A month after the divorce, Chicago transitioned into late, biting autumn. The moral sentence and the price for his emotional betrayal began to seep into every corner of Richard's life in the most brutal way. His prestigious law firm was now practically a ghost town. The exodus of major corporate clients after the scandal pushed his firm to the brink of bankruptcy. Longtime partners, the very people who used to look at him with reverence, were now handing in their resignations, refusing to let their careers sink with a dying ship. Richard moved into a dingy 500-square-foot apartment on the outskirts of the city. There was no grand living room, no part-time housekeeper. Everything in this cramped space radiated a messy, terrifying loneliness. Late one evening, after a day of wrestling with dissolution paperwork and breach of contract settlements, Richard returned home exhausted. He sluggishly flicked on the fluorescent ceiling light. A cold, bluish-white glare washed over the empty room. Richard walked into the tiny kitchenette, opened the bare fridge, and closed it with a heavy sigh. He saw a cheap electric kettle with a thick layer of mineral buildup at the bottom. Suddenly remembering the delicate ceramic teapot Claire always used to brew his chamomile sleep tea every night. How long had it been since he had a proper cup of hot tea when he got home? How long had it been since he had to face his burning stomach ulcers alone, without someone nagging him to take his medicine before eating? He fumbled with the stove, deciding to make some instant mac and cheese. The water boiling violently in the dead silence only amplified the absolute loneliness eating away at his soul. As he held the cheap plastic fork, tears suddenly spilled from Richard's eyes, dropping into the steaming bowl of fake cheese. They say that when middle-aged men lose their families, that's when they truly understand what it means to have nothing. He used to have it all. He had a devoted wife willing to sacrifice her prime for him. He had a peaceful sanctuary others dreamed of. Yet, just because of his selfishness, his greedy desire for the fleeting adoration of an office romance, he had smashed it all with his own hands. The price he was paying was something he couldn't afford to make right for the rest of his life. While Richard was sinking deep into the mud of regret and failure, Claire's life flipped to a brilliant, glowing new chapter. Walking away from a toxic marriage, the 35-year-old woman was reborn from the ashes. She no longer had to stay up late waiting for a thoughtless husband, no longer had to overthink and torture herself over office rumors. The aura of the Apex creative director grew more elegant, seductive, and fierce by the day. The massive campaign with Sterling Ridge Estates was a roaring success, elevating Claire's name to new heights in the corporate world. Her agency's revenue skyrocketed. Her team looked up to her with absolute respect and admiration. Claire wore the latest designer fashion, a radiant smile always gracing her lips. She was busy with board meetings and panels, but she never forgot to make time for herself and her family. One weekend afternoon, Claire drove her new SUV to visit her mother. Martha's small suburban house was bathed in golden autumn sunlight. The rich aroma of homemade pot roast wafted from the kitchen, making Claire's heart feel incredibly at peace. Martha looked at her daughter, seeing her glowing skin and confident aura, and let out a sigh of relief. Claire, honey, looking at you now, I know the choice you made was the right one, Martha said, placing a tender piece of beef on Claire's plate. I used to be so old-fashioned. I thought a woman just had to endure to keep the family together, afraid of what the neighbors would say. But now I get it. Living next to a man who doesn't value you, even if the house is huge and the money is endless, is just living in a fancy prison. You own your life now. You found your own happiness. I'm at peace. Claire smiled softly, holding her mother's weathered hand. Her voice was warm but full of lived experience. Mom, even if a woman is in her 30s, it's never too late to start loving herself. I don't regret the past, and I don't hold any hatred for Richard anymore. I realize life is too short. Instead of wasting time crying over someone who betrayed me, I chose to use it to build my own value and bring joy to the people who actually love me. You can't unring a bell, and there's no point in trying. After the warm dinner with her mother, Claire returned to her downtown loft. She had bought a place with a small terrace garden. The white jasmine she had planted was in full bloom, releasing a pure, soothing fragrance into the autumn wind. She remembered the storm that night, the silent tears she cried alone by the cold kitchen island. All those painful memories had faded away, becoming a profound life lesson that made her stronger and more resilient. She stood on the balcony taking a deep breath of the crisp air, clearly feeling the true freedom and peace flowing through her veins. 3 months later, on a freezing, drizzly Chicago winter afternoon, Claire had a client meeting at an upscale coffee house in the West Loop. After wrapping up the pitch, she walked her clients to their cars and stepped back inside, intending to relax for a moment before heading out. As she walked past the glass partitions, her eyes suddenly froze. Sitting at a corner table hidden behind some potted plants was a familiar figure. It was Richard, the man who had shared her bed for 15 years. The man who used to be a legendary senior partner. He was sitting there, looking so shocking she could barely process it. He wore a faded, worn-out peacoat. His face was gaunt, deep wrinkles of hardship etched into his skin. His hair was peppered with gray, even though he hadn't even hit 40. In front of him were not million-dollar legal briefs, but printed cover letters and an outdated laptop running sluggishly. Seeing Claire walk up, Richard jumped. He frantically stood up, clumsily trying to gather the papers on the table. His eyes flashed with ultimate humiliation and shame at letting his ex-wife see him in this pathetic state. Claire, you're here? Richard's voice trembled, harsh and raspy. Claire looked at him. Her eyes were completely detached. There was no gloating of a winner, nor was there the pity of an old flame. She gave a small nod and pulled out the chair across from him. Her posture was still perfectly confident, as flawless as a painting. Sit down, Richard. It's been a while. You don't look like you're doing well. Richard hesitated, sitting down. He clasped his hands tightly together and shoved them under the table to hide his shaking. He looked at the woman across from him. The woman who once belonged entirely to him, now sitting so far out of his reach, like a star in the sky. Claire's radiant, sophisticated beauty only highlighted his own ruined, pathetic reality. I'm fine. Just a career transition lately, Richard lied, but his choked voice betrayed him. He dropped his head, unable to look her in the eye. Tears of shame threatened to spill. Claire, I'm sorry. All this time, living alone in a freezing, empty room, I finally understood how you felt back then. I miss every meal you cooked. I miss every shirt you ironed. I even miss your complaining that I used to think was so annoying. I've paid too high a price for my stupidity. My firm dissolved. My friends and partners turned their backs. Even Victoria and Chloe vanished once they ruined me. I have nothing left, Claire. Claire listened to her ex-husband's confession. Her heart was completely at peace. She didn't interrupt him. When he finished, she gently pushed her warm cup of coffee toward him, her voice soft but holding absolute finality. Richard, you don't need to apologize to me anymore. The sentence you're serving wasn't handed down by me or the court. It's the karma born from your own apathy and betrayal. Men often make the mistake of thinking that as long as they don't get into someone else's bed, they've perfectly fulfilled their duties as a husband. You forget that a marriage doesn't fear poverty or struggle. It fears silence, and it fears ignoring each other's sadness. You hid things from me to share your inner thoughts with another girl, leaving me isolated in my own home. That was the fatal wound that killed our 15 years together. She stood up, picking up her handbag, looking at him one last time with peaceful eyes. I signed those divorce papers, which means our past is completely over. I don't hate you, and I don't wish for your suffering. You're a good lawyer. If you stumble, if you have the drive, you can start over as a better, more decent man. Live in a way that, later on, you won't have to be ashamed of yourself. Goodbye, Richard. With that, Claire turned and walked away. Her proud, straight silhouette caught the warm glow of the cafe lights. She stepped out into the freezing drizzle, getting into her waiting car. Richard sat frozen in place, watching the taillights of her car disappear into the busy Chicago traffic. He knew that in this lifetime, he had truly lost his one and only treasure. The woman who had walked with him through the days of having nothing would never come back. This life sentence of conscience would follow him forever, reminding him of the exorbitant price of betrayal and neglect. The story of Claire and Richard comes to a close, leaving us with deep echoes and incredibly valuable life lessons about the meaning of marriage. In everyday life, how many marriages are falling into this exact scenario? A husband frantically chases the glimmer of money and status, indulging in the temporary adoration of young office flings, while completely forgetting the devoted wife silently sacrificing in their kitchen. They think simply bringing home a paycheck is enough. They think a woman's endurance is a given. But they fail to understand that a woman's heart, no matter how forgiving, has its limits. When the apathy and silence drag on too long, when trust is betrayed from the very depths of the mind, a woman will decisively strip away the facade of a fake happy marriage to save herself. Because for a woman stepping into midlife, winning or losing in society is no longer the core issue. What matters is finding peace in her soul and maintaining her own dignity. There is a saying highly worth pondering. The person who hurts us the most is often the one we trusted to hold us the longest. If today's story touched your emotions and gave you something to think about, leave a comment sharing your perspective. If you were Claire, would you have chosen to walk away, refusing Richard's belated apologies? And to the husbands out there, will you have the courage to look at yourselves and cherish the woman beside you before it's entirely too late?